Those who are acquainted only with the Christian or some Indian bhakti forms of religion may wonder where really in Zen is that which corresponds to their notion of God and their pious attitude towards Him. Reality sounds to them too conceptual and philosophical and not devotional enough. In fact, Buddhism uses quite frequently more abstract-sounding terms than reality. For instance, suchness, or thusness, tathata, emptiness or void, shunyata, limit of reality, bhutakoti, and so forth. And this is sometimes what leads Christian critics, and even Japanese scholars themselves, to regard Zen as the teaching of a quietistic, meditative life. But with the followers of Zen, these terms are not conceptual at all, but quite real and direct, vital and energizing, because reality, or suchness, or emptiness, is taken hold of in the midst of the concrete living facts of the universe, and not abstracted from them by means of thought. Zen never leaves this world of facts. Zen always lives in the midst of realities. It is not for Zen to stand apart or keep itself away from a world of names and forms. If there is a God, personal or impersonal, he or she or it must be with Zen and in Zen. As long as an objective world, whether religiously or philosophically or poetically considered, remains a threatening and annihilating power standing against us, there is no Zen here. For Zen makes a humble blade of grass act as the Buddha body 16 feet high, and conversely, the Buddha body 16 feet high acts as a humble blade of grass. Zen holds the whole universe, as it were, in its palm. This is the religion of Zen. Zen is often thought to be a form of pantheism. Apparently it is, and Buddhists themselves sometimes ignorantly subscribe to this view. But if this is taken as truly characterizing the essence of Zen, it altogether misses the point. For Zen is most decidedly not pantheistic in the same measure as Christianity is not. Listen to this dialogue between the 10th century master Umon and his disciple. Monk, what is the pure body of the Dharma? Master, the hedgerow. Monk, what is the behavior of the one who thus understands? Master, he is a golden-haired lion. When God is the hedgerow dividing the monastery grounds from the neighboring farms, there is perhaps a faint suggestion of pantheism, we may say. But what about the golden-haired lion? The animal is not a manifestation of anything else. He is supreme. He is autonomous. He is king of the beasts. He is complete as he is. No idea is suggested here of the manifestation of anything in any form. The golden-haired lion, as it stands in Umon's statement, may not be quite intelligible, even with this short explanatory comment, to those who are not used to the Zen way of expression. To help them, I may quote another Zen question and answer mondo. Monk, I understand that when a lion seizes upon his opponent, whether it is a hare or an elephant, he makes an exhaustive use of his power. Pray tell me what this power is. Master, the spirit of sincerity, which means literally the power of not deceiving. Rinzai was one of the greatest Zen masters of the Tang dynasty in the 9th century, and his analects, known as the Rinzai Roku, are considered by some the supreme specimen of Zen literature. According to Rinzai, sincerity, that is, not deceiving, or putting forth one's whole being, is the whole being in action, called Zentai Sayu, in which nothing is kept in reserve, nothing is expressed under disguise, nothing goes to waste. When a person lives like this, he is said to be a golden-haired lion. He is the symbol of virility, sincerity, wholeheartedness. He is divinely human. He is not a manifestation, but reality itself, for he has nothing behind him. He is the whole truth, the very thing. This Zen way of understanding life and the world must be distinctly comprehended, as it is important when later the fact is demonstrated that there is nothing of symbolism in the Japanese love of nature. If it is necessary to apply to Zen some form of classification, Zen may be pronounced a polytheism, although this many is to be taken as corresponding to the sands of the Ganges, not a few thousands of gods, but hundreds of thousands of kotis of gods. In Zen, each individual is an absolute entity, and as such he is related to all other individuals. This nexus of infinite interrelationships is made possible in the realm of emptiness, because they all find their being here even as they are, that is, as individual realities. In short, Zen has its own way of handling reality, and this Zen way of handling reality constitutes the inner meaning of the Japanese love of nature. For the Japanese love of nature is not to be understood in the sense in which it is ordinarily understood. This will be made clearer as we proceed. Zen is ascetic when it plays the role of a moral discipline, in the sense that it aims at simplicity in all its forms. It has something of the Stoicism in which the samurai class of Japan has been reared. The simplicity and frugality of the Kamakura life under the Hojo regime in the 13th century no doubt owes its initial motives to the influence of Zen. Furthermore, the moral courage and indomitable spirit of Hojo Tokimune, without whom the history of Japan would probably have taken quite a different course, were fostered by the teaching of Zen under the Chinese masters. They, by the invitation of the Hojo government, found their shelter then in Japan. Tokiyori, father of Tokimune, was also a great Zen devotee, and it was indeed under his direction that Tokimune visited the Zen monasteries. There he went through a moral and spiritual training, making himself thereby one of the greatest figures in the annals of Japan. In Zen we find Chinese pragmatism solidly welded with Indian metaphysics and its high-soaring speculations. Without this perfect welding of the two highest forms of Oriental culture, it is very unlikely that Zen could have grown even in the congenial and therefore fruitful soil of Japan. And Zen came to Japan at the most opportune time in its history, because it was then that the old schools of Buddhism in Nara and Kyoto had proved ineffectual to usher in a new spiritual era. It was most fortunate for Zen that it found in the very beginning of its career in Japan such able disciples as Hojo Tokiyori and Tokimune. So far, the meaning of the part the Hojo family played in the cultural, political, and economic history of Japan has not been fully appreciated. This was chiefly due to those of militaristic bias who tried to interpret history in their own crooked style. As Japanese scholars, however, begin to study it from a new point of view, which is now possible through the tragic experience of recent years, they will surely come to realize the significance of the Kamakura era, of which Yasutoki, Tokiyori, and Tokimune were the most remarkable representatives, and the significance of Zen in this period as one of the most effective molding agencies of the Japanese character will also be understood. What is the most specific characteristic of Zen asceticism in connection with the Japanese love of nature? It consists in paying nature the fullest respect it deserves. By this it is meant that we may treat nature not as an object to conquer and turn wantonly to our human service, but as a friend, as a fellow being, who is destined like ourselves for Buddhahood. Zen wants us to meet nature as a friendly, well-meaning agent whose inner being is thoroughly like our own, always ready to work in accord with our legitimate aspirations. Nature is never our enemy, standing always against us in a threatening attitude. It is not a power which will crush us if we do not crush it or bind it into our service. Zen asceticism consists not necessarily in curbing or destroying our desires and instincts, but in respecting nature and not violating it, whether our own nature or the nature of the objective world. Self-mortification is not the proper attitude we may take toward ourselves, nor is selfish utilization the justifiable idea we may conceive toward nature in any sense. Therefore, Zen asceticism is not at all in sympathy with the materialistic trends so much in evidence all over the world, in science, industrialism, commercialism, and many other movements of thought. Zen purposes to respect nature, to love nature, to live its own life. Zen recognizes that our nature is one with objective nature, not in the mathematical sense, but in the sense that nature lives in us and we in nature. For this reason, Zen asceticism advocates simplicity, frugality, straightforwardness, virility, making no attempt to utilize nature for selfish purposes. Asceticism, some are afraid, lowers the standard of living. But to speak candidly, the losing of the soul is more than the gaining of the world. Are we not constantly engaged in warlike preparations everywhere in order to raise or maintain our precious standard of living? If this state of affairs continues, there is no doubt of our finally destroying one another, not only individually but internationally. Instead of raising the so-called standard of living, will it not be far, far better to elevate the equality of living? This is a truism, but in no time of history has such a truism been more in need of being loudly declared than in these days of greed, jealousy, and iniquity. We followers of Zen ought to stand strongly for the asceticism it teaches. The aesthetic aspect of Zen teaching is closely related to Zen asceticism, in that there is in it both the absence of selfhood and the merging of subject and object in one absolute emptiness, or shunyata. This is a strange saying, but as the basic teaching of Zen, it is reiterated everywhere in Zen literature. To explain this is a great philosophical task, full of intellectual pitfalls. Not only does it require arduous and sustained thinking, but frequently this very thinking is apt to lead to grave misconceptions of the true meaning of Zen experience. Therefore, as already hinted, Zen avoids abstract statements and conceptual reasoning, and its literature is almost nothing but endless citations of the so-called anecdotes or incidents, inen in Japanese, or questions and answers known as mondo. To those who have not been initiated into its mystery, it is a wild and unapproachable territory of briars and brambles. The Zen masters, however, are not yielding. They insist on having their own way of expressing themselves. They think that in this respect they know best, and they are in the right because the nature of their experience is determinative as regards their method of communication and demonstration. If I cite the following mondo to illustrate Zen aestheticism, I hope you will not take me as purposely mystifying my position. While Riko, a high government official of the Tang dynasty, had a talk with his Zen master Nansen, the official quoted a saying of Sojo, a noted monk scholar of an earlier dynasty. "Heaven and earth and I are of the same root. The 10,000 things and I are of one substance." And continued, "Is not this a most remarkable statement?" Nansen called the attention of the visitor to the flowering plant in the garden and said, "People of the world look at these flowers as if they were in a dream." This story, or mondo, eloquently describes the aesthetic attitude of Zen towards objects of nature. Most people do not really know how to look at the flower. For one thing, they stand away from it. They never grasp the spirit of it, as they have no firm hold of it. They are as if dreaming of a flower. The one who beholds is separated from the object which is beheld. There is an impassable gap between the two, and it is impossible for the beholder to come in touch inwardly with his object. Here is no grasping of actual facts as we face them. If heaven and earth with all the manifold objects between them, issue from the one root which you and I also come from. This root must be firmly seized upon so that there is an actual experience of it. For it is in this experience that Nansen's flower in its natural beauty appealed to his aesthetic sense. The so-called Japanese love of nature becomes related to Zen when we come to this experience of nature appreciation, which is nature living. Here we must remember that the experience of mere oneness is not enough for the real appreciation of nature. This no doubt gives a philosophical foundation to the sentimentalism of the nature-loving Japanese, who are thus helped to enter deeply into the secrets of their own aesthetic consciousness. Sentimentalism to that extent is purified, one may say. But the feeling of love is possible in a world of multiplicity. Nansen's remark falls flat where there is only sameness. It is true that people of the world are dreaming because they do not see into the real foundation of existence. The balancing of unity and multiplicity, or better, the merging of self with others as in the philosophy of the Avatamsaka, is absolutely necessary to the aesthetic understanding of nature. Tennyson says, "Little flower, but if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is." The beauty of the little flower in the crannied wall is really appreciated only when it is referred to the ultimate reason of all things. But it goes without saying that this is not to be done in a merely philosophical and conceptual way, but in the way Zen proposes to accomplish it, not in a pantheistic way, nor in a quietistic way, but in the living way, as has been done by Nansen and his followers. To do this, and to appreciate Nansen truly, one must first greet Riko and be friendly with him. For it is in this way that one can feel the force of the remark made by Nansen. The genuine beauty of the flower as he saw it is for the first time reflected in one's soul mirror. The aesthetic appreciation of nature always involves something religious. And by being religious, I mean being super-worldly, going beyond the world of relativity, where we are bound to encounter oppositions and limitations. The oppositions and limitations which confront every movement of ours, physical and psychological, put a stop also to the free flow of our aesthetical feeling towards its objects. Beauty is felt when there is freedom of motion and freedom of expression. Beauty is not in form, but in the meaning it expresses, and this meaning is felt when the observing subject throws his whole being into the bearer of the meaning and moves along with it. This is possible only when he lives in a superworld, where no mutually excluding oppositions take place, or rather, when the mutually excluding oppositions of which we are always too conscious in this world of multiplicities are taken up even as they are into something of a higher order than they. Asceticism now merges into religion. In his book, Japan, A Short Cultural History, Sir George Sansom makes this comment concerning the Zen love of nature. But the Zen artists and the Zen poets, and it is often hard to say where their poetry ends and their painting begins, feel no antithesis between man and nature, and are conscious even of an identity rather than a kinship. What interests them is not the restless movement on the surface of life, but, as Professor Anazaki puts it, the eternal tranquility seen through and behind change. Unquote. This is not Zen at all. Both Professor Anazaki and Sir George Sansom fail to grasp the true Zen attitude towards nature. It is not an experience of identification, nor is it the feeling of eternal tranquility they dream of. If the poets and the artists linger with that which is felt through and behind change, they are still walking hand in hand with Riko and Sojo. They are far, far from being friends of Nansen. The real flower is enjoyed only when the poet-artist lives with it, in it, and when even a sense of identity is no longer here, much less the eternal tranquility. Thus, I wish to emphasize that Zen does not see any such thing as is designated the restless movement on the surface of life, for life is one integral and indivisible whole, with neither surface nor interior, hence no restless movement which can be separated from life itself. As was explained in the case of Umon's golden-haired lion, life moves in its complete oneness, whether restlessly or serenely as you may conceive it. Your interpretation does not alter the fact. Zen takes hold of life in its wholeness and moves restlessly with it or stays quietly with it. Wherever there is any sign of life at all, there is Zen. When, however, the eternal tranquility is abstracted from the restless movement on the surface of life, it sinks into death, and there is no more of its surface either. The tranquility of Zen is in the midst of the boiling oil, the surging waves, and in the flames enveloping the god Akala. Han Shan was one of the most famous poet-lunatics of the Tang dynasty. Zen often produces so-called lunatics, and one of his poems reads, "My mind is like the autumnal moon, and how clear and transparent the deep pool. No comparison, however, in any form is possible. It is altogether beyond description." Superficially, this poem may suggest the idea of tranquility or serenity. The autumnal moon is serene, and its light uniformly pervading the fields and rivers and mountains may make us think of the oneness of things. But this is where Han Shan hesitates to draw any comparison between his feelings and the things of this world. The reason is sure to take the pointing finger for the moon, as our worthy critics frequently do. To tell the truth, there is here not the remotest hint of tranquility or serenity, nor of the identity of nature and man. If anything is suggested here, it is the idea of utmost transparency which the poet feels through and through. He is entirely lifted out of his bodily existence, including both his objective world and his subjective mind. He has no such interfering mediums inside and outside. He is thoroughly pure, and from this position of absolute purity or transparency, he looks out on a world of so-called multiplicity. He sees flowers and mountains and 10,000 other things, and will pronounce them beautiful and satisfying. The restless movements are to be appreciated just as much as the eternal tranquility. It goes entirely against the spirit of Zen and the Japanese idea of love of nature to imagine that the Japanese Zen poets and artists avoid the restlessness of a world of multiplicity in order to get into the eternal tranquility of abstract ideas. Let us first get an experience of transparency, and we are able to love nature and its multifarious objects, though not dualistically. As long as we harbor conceptual illusions arising from the separation of subject and object and believe them final, the transparency is obscured, and our love of nature is contaminated with dualism and sophistry. Allow me to quote another 14th century poet of Zen, this time a Japanese and the founder of a great Zen monastery called Eigenji in the province of Omi. His name is Jakushitsu. The wind stirs the flying waterfall and sends in refreshing music. The moon is risen over the opposite peak, and the bamboo shadows are cast over my paper window. As I grow older, the mountain retreat appeals all the more strongly to my feeling. Even when I am buried after death underneath the rock, my bones will be as thoroughly transparent as ever. Some readers may be tempted to read into this poem a sense of solitude or quietness, but that this altogether misses the point is apparent to those who know at all what Zen is. Unless the Zen artist is saturated with the feeling Jakushitsu graphically expresses here, he cannot expect to understand nature, nor can he truly love nature. Transparency is the keynote to the Zen understanding of nature, and it is from this that its love of nature starts. When people say that Zen has given a philosophical and religious foundation to the Japanese love of nature, this Zen attitude or feeling must be taken fully into consideration. When Sir George Sansom surmises that aristocrats, monks, and artists were moved by a belief that all nature is permeated by one spirit, and that it was the aim of the Zen practitioner in particular, by purging his mind of egotistic commotions, to reach a tranquil, intuitive realization of his identity with the universe, he ignores the part that Zen has really contributed to the Japanese aesthetic appreciation of nature. He cannot shake off the idea of eternal tranquility or of a spiritual identity between subject and object. The idea of spiritual identity, by which our egotistic commotions are kept quiet and in which eternal tranquility is experienced, is an alluring idea. Most students of Oriental culture and philosophy grasp at it as giving them the key to the inscrutable psychology of the Eastern peoples. But this is the Western mind trying to solve the mystery in its own way. In fact, it cannot do anything else. As far as we Japanese are concerned, we are unable to accept without comment this interpretation offered by the Western critics. Plainly speaking, Zen does not acknowledge one spirit permeating all nature, nor does it attempt to realize identity by purging its mind of egotistic commotions. According to the author of this statement, the grasping of one spirit is evidently the realization of identity that is left behind when the purgation of egotism is effected. While it is difficult to refute this idea convincingly as long as we are arguing along the logical line of yes and no, I will yet try to make my point clearer. It is now necessary to say something about Zen epistemology. The term may sound too philosophical, but my object here is to make some plain statements about the facts of Zen intuition. What Zen is most anxious to do in its own characterization is to reject conceptual mediumship of any kind. Any medium that is set up before Zen in its attempt to understand the facts of experience is sure to obscure the nature of the latter. Instead of clarifying or simplifying the situation, the presence of a third party always ends in creating complexities and obscurations. Zen therefore abhors mediums. It advises its followers to have direct dealings with their objects, whatever they may be. We often speak of identification in our Zen discipline, but this word is not exact. Identification presupposes original opposition of two terms, subject and object. But the truth is that from the very first, there are no two opposing terms whose identification is to be achieved by Zen. It is better to say that there has never been any separation between subject and object, and that all the discrimination and separation we have, or rather make, is a later creation, though the concept of time is not to be interposed here. The aim of Zen is thus to restore the experience of original inseparability, which means, in other words, to return to the original state of purity and transparency. This is the reason conceptual discrimination is discredited in Zen. Followers of identity and tranquility are to be given the warning: they are ridden by concepts. Let them rise to the facts and live in and with them. Chosha, of the Tang dynasty, one day came back from a walk in the mountains. When he reached the monastery gate, the head monk asked, "Where have you been all this time, reverend sir?" Replied the master, "I am just back from my mountain walk." The monk pursued, "Where in the mountains?" "I first went out in the field scented with grasses, and then walked home watching the flowers fall." Is there any expression here suggestive of tranquility that is behind and through change? or of identity that is perceptible between Shosha and the grasses and flowers among which he walked up and down. Shosha one evening was enjoying the moonlight with his friend Kyozan. Kyozan, pointing at the moon, said, "Each person without exception has this, only that he fails to use it." Shosha said, "Just as you say, and may I ask you to use it?" Kyozan replied, "Let me see how you use it." Let me now repeat and annotate this conversation. Kyozan: each person without exception has this, only that he fails to use it. Is this a suggestion of one spirit or of tranquility? Shosha: just as you say, and may I ask you to use it? As long as identity or tranquility blinds your eyesight, how can you use it? Kyozan: let me see how you use it. Did he then enter into nirvana eternally serene? Indeed, no. For as this conversation ended, Shosha kicked his brother monk down to the ground. Kyozan, quietly rising, remarked, "Oh, brother monk, you are indeed like a tiger." When this tiger, like the golden-haired lion, roars, one ghostly spirit so valued by the critics vanishes, and tranquility is no more. A strange yet lively scene enacted by the Zen poets who were supposed to be enjoying the serenity of a moonlit eve makes us pause and think about the significance of Zen in regard to its relation to the Japanese love of nature. What is really here that stirs up the two apparently meditative and nature-loving monks? The epistemology of Zen is therefore not to resort to the mediumship of concepts. If you want to understand Zen, understand it right away without deliberation, without turning your head this way or that. For while you are doing this, the object you have been seeking for is no longer there. This doctrine of immediate grasping is characteristic of Zen. If the Greeks taught us how to reason, and Christianity what to believe, it is Zen that teaches us to go beyond logic and not to tarry even when we come up against the things which are not seen. For the Zen point of view is to find an absolute point where no dualism in whatever form obtains. Logic starts from the division of subject and object, and belief distinguishes between what is seen and what is not seen. The Western mode of thinking can never do away with this eternal dilemma, this or that, reason or faith, man or God, etc. With Zen, all these are swept aside as something veiling our insight into the nature of life and reality. Zen leads us into a realm of emptiness or void, where no conceptualism prevails, where rootless trees grow, and a most refreshing breeze sweeps over all the ground. From this short characterization of Zen, we can see what Zen's attitude towards nature is. It is not a sense of identity, nor of tranquility that Zen sees and loves in nature. Nature is always in motion, never at a standstill. If nature is to be loved, it must be caught while moving, and in this way its aesthetic value must be appraised. To seek tranquility is to kill nature, to stop its pulsation, and to embrace the dead corpse that is left behind. Advocates of tranquility are worshippers of abstraction and death. There is nothing in this to love. Identity is also a static condition, and decidedly associated with death. When we are dead, we return to the dust where we started. We are then identified with the earth. Identification is not the thing to covet highly. Let us destroy all such artificial barriers we put up between nature and ourselves, for it is only when they are removed that we see into the living heart of nature and live with it, which is the real meaning of love. For this, therefore, the clearing away of all conceptual scaffolds is imperative. When Zen speaks of transparency, it means this clearing away, this thorough wiping of the surface of the mind mirror. But in point of fact, the mirror has never been obscured, and no need has ever been felt for wiping it clean. But because of such notions as identity, tranquility, one spirit, egotistic commotions, and so on, we are compelled to set up a general sweeping operation. After these interpretations, some may declare Zen to be a form of nature mysticism, a philosophical intuitionalism, and a religion advocating stoical simplicity and austerity. However this is, Zen gives us a most comprehensive outlook on the world, because the realm of Zen extends to the very limits of thousands of kotis of chiliacosms, and even beyond them all. Zen has a most penetrating insight into reality, because it sounds the very depths of all existence. Zen knows a most thoroughgoing way of appreciating the genuinely beautiful, because it lives in the body of the beautiful itself, known as the golden-colored Buddha body, with the 32 major and 80 minor marks of superhumanity. With these as the background, the Japanese love of nature unfolds itself as it comes in contact with its objects.